It started on a quiet Monday morning in late spring. A rusty red pickup truck sat halfway across our gravel driveway, engine ticking as if it had just been shut off. A bright white sticker on the windshield read, HOA utility vehicle. Mud streaked its sides, and one of the mirrors was cracked. Grandpa Walt stood on the porch with his coffee, staring at it like it had personally insulted him. "Whose truck is that?" I asked, stepping beside him. He didn't even blink. "Ours now, apparently," he muttered. For a moment, I thought he was joking, but the frown lines carved into his weathered face said otherwise. That week, the Maplewood Estates HOA had started some drainage repairs near the main road, and somehow, someone on their crew had decided our driveway was the perfect place to park. Grandpa had already told them, twice, that our property wasn't part of the HOA's common access route. They'd ignored him both times, saying it was temporary. By Tuesday, the truck was still there. By Wednesday, another one appeared. This one an old green flatbed with more mud than paint. By Friday, the two of them blocked nearly the entire drive. Mom couldn't even pull her car into the garage. Grandpa called the HOA office that morning. After 20 minutes on hold, a cheerful voice finally answered, only to transfer him to the maintenance department. Then came another 10 minutes of waiting before a dull tone announced, "Please leave a message," after the beep. He hung up without saying a word. That afternoon, he drove down to the HOA office himself. I went with him. The building was small, beige, and self-important, the kind that smelled like printer ink and fake smiles. The receptionist, a woman named Cheryl with a pinched expression, barely looked up when Grandpa explained the problem. "The maintenance manager isn't available today," she said flatly. "You can fill out a complaint form." Grandpa stared at the stack of papers like it was an insult. Then he took one, filled it out right there. Neat handwriting full of words like trespass and property rights, and dropped it into a box labeled priority complaints. A week passed. Nothing happened. By Saturday morning, muddy tire tracks still scarred the gravel. Grandpa stood there in his old flannel shirt and work boots, staring at those trucks as if weighing his next move. I came outside, coffee in hand. "You gonna call them again?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, he said, "If they want to treat this driveway like their land." He looked at the sun rising over the hill, eyes narrowing with a kind of mischievous calm. "Then we'll make it into something worth protecting." He turned, walked into the shed, and came back out holding his old steel shovel. He planted it into the dirt with a satisfying thunk. And that's when I knew the HOA had just picked the wrong man to ignore. The next morning, Grandpa was already outside before sunrise. I heard the scrape of metal against gravel and peeked through the kitchen window. He was marking the driveway with wooden stakes and orange string, moving with a quiet focus that made me nervous. When I stepped out with a cup of coffee, he didn't look up. "Morning," I said. "What's with the construction setup?" He straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Not construction," he said. "Transformation." "Transformation?" He grinned, that same stubborn, mischievous grin I'd seen when he beat a speeding ticket once by proving the town's radar gun wasn't calibrated. "We're going to make this driveway a garden." At first, I thought he was joking, but by noon, it was clear he wasn't. Grandpa, at 72, worked like a man half his age. He dug up gravel, tilled the soil beneath, and hauled in bags of compost he'd been saving behind the shed. The red HOA truck still sat there, its tires half buried now in churned dirt. Grandpa worked around it deliberately, never touching it, never complaining. He just treated it like another rock in a field. By afternoon, Mom came outside, hands on her hips. "Dad, what are you doing to the driveway?" "Beautifying it," Grandpa said simply. "They wanted to use my land. Now it's a landscape." When I asked how he planned to handle the trucks, he just shrugged. "I'm not moving them. Let them see what happens when you leave junk on my property." He had a system. First came the flowers, marigolds, petunias, and lavender, bright and sweet-smelling. Then came the vegetables, tomatoes, peppers, and beans. He planted them in neat rows, weaving around the tires and along the path leading to the porch. By evening, our driveway looked less like an access route and more like a patchwork of color. The HOA trucks looked ridiculous sitting there, surrounded by blossoms and rich soil. Grandpa even built a small wooden arch over the entrance with a hand-painted sign that read, "Private garden, no unauthorized vehicles." The neighbors started wandering over. Mr. Kemp from next door laughed so hard he nearly dropped his mail. "Walt, you've outdone yourself," he said. "They're going to lose their minds." "Oh, they already have," Grandpa replied. "They just don't know it yet." That Monday, an HOA field rep showed up in a white shirt and sunglasses, clipboard in hand. He pointed at the flowers and said, "You can't do this. This is an access lane." Grandpa calmly handed him a copy of the property map. "According to the county, this isn't your access lane. It's my driveway, and now it's my garden." The man sputtered something about violations and removal orders before storming off. Grandpa just smiled, leaned on his shovel, and said to me, "Nature doesn't need permission to grow. Neither do I." That night, under the porch light, he started building a small picket fence, one that wrapped neatly around the trucks like a frame around a painting. The next morning, the HOA vehicles were still there, but now they were trapped inside a blooming masterpiece. By midweek, the HOA's patience had worn thinner than the paint on their old red truck. Every morning, a different official would drive by, stop, take photos, and leave. They didn't dare step inside the fence. Grandpa had posted a polite but pointed sign. "Private property, garden area. Trespassers will be composted." It was meant as a joke, but the HOA didn't have a sense of humor. That Friday, an envelope showed up taped to our mailbox. Inside was a neatly printed letter from the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association Enforcement Committee. It ordered Grandpa to cease all unapproved landscaping and remove all obstructions preventing HOA vehicles from conducting maintenance. Grandpa read it twice, then looked at me. "So, they admit it's landscaping," he said. "That's good to know." He folded the letter, tucked it into his back pocket, and went right back to watering his tomatoes. That night, he stayed up late at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of black coffee. When I peeked in, he was filling out an online form. "What are you doing?" I asked. He smiled, making it official. By the next morning, the driveway had a new identity. Grandpa had registered it as a certified wildlife habitat through the Greene County Environmental Program, a legitimate nonprofit that promoted native gardens and pollinator protection. To qualify, he only needed to show he had native plants, a water source, and shelter for wildlife. The flowers and vegetables were already there. He added a small bird bath near the porch, 2 bee houses made from bamboo, and a shallow dish filled with pebbles for butterflies. When he got the certification approval email, he printed it, framed it, and nailed it to a wooden post right at the fence gate. Beneath it, he added a new sign, "Protected Habitat Area, certified by Greene County Environmental Council." Now, it wasn't just a garden, it was legally protected. When the HOA field officer, Mr. Dwyer, showed up again that afternoon, clipboard in hand, he froze at the sight of the certification. "You're kidding me," he muttered, scanning the paper. Grandpa stood beside him, arms crossed. "Nope. County recognized habitat. Can't disturb it without approval from environmental authorities." Mr. Dwyer sputtered. You can't do this overnight." "Didn't do it overnight," Grandpa said calmly. "Been cultivating it for a while. You just didn't notice." The man stomped away, fuming, kicking a rock as he went. By Sunday, news of Grandpa's garden takeover had spread across the neighborhood. Someone snapped photos and posted them on the Maplewood Community Facebook group with the caption, "HOA parks truck illegally. Homeowner turns it into certified wildlife habitat." The post exploded. Hundreds of likes, dozens of laughing emojis, and comments like, "This man's my new hero. I'm joining the Greene County program tomorrow." Finally, someone stood up to them. Even people from other neighborhoods chimed in, sharing stories of their own HOA battles. It became something bigger, a quiet rebellion against the nitpicking and power-tripping that had plagued the community for years. Within days, people were driving by just to see Grandpa's garden truck. Families slowed down to take photos. Kids pointed out the flowers. One local blogger called it eco-protest art. But not everyone was laughing. On Tuesday morning, the HOA's president, Ms. Evelyn Ricks, showed up in person. She was known for her sharp suits, tighter smile, and love of rules. She stood outside the fence, tapping her pen against a clipboard like a judge about to hand down a sentence. "Mr. Carson," she began, her tone sugary but cold, "you've created quite a spectacle." Grandpa didn't stop raking. "Thank you kindly," he said without looking up. "You're in violation of several community ordinances," she continued. "Unauthorized landscaping, obstruction of HOA property, and creating an unsafe environment for maintenance crews." Grandpa straightened up, leaning on his rake. "Unsafe? You mean for butterflies?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm warning you, if you don't remove these structures and allow our vehicle access, the association will fine you up to $500 per day." He nodded slowly. "You go ahead and send that fine. Make sure it's addressed to Walt Carson, Certified Wildlife Habitat Manager." Evelyn turned on her heel and left without another word. That evening, Grandpa sat on the porch, sipping lemonade, while I read out loud from the Facebook post. It had been shared by a local news page now. A reporter even left a comment asking for an interview. He chuckled. "Let's see them find me now." 2 days later, a small TV van pulled up outside. The reporter, a young woman named Tanya Ruiz, interviewed Grandpa for a segment on local acts of eco-resistance. He kept it simple. "They parked on my land without asking. I didn't get mad, I got green." The clip went viral. Within a week, everyone in town knew about the old man who turned HOA vehicles into garden sculptures. Even the mayor's office called, asking if they could feature the project in an upcoming community sustainability event. Meanwhile, the HOA board went silent. They stopped sending letters. They stopped calling. The trucks, however, were still there, trapped beneath a growing jungle of color. By the end of the month, vines had begun curling around the mirrors and bumpers. Bees hummed around sunflowers that stretched nearly to the hood. The red paint of the truck looked soft and faded behind a veil of green leaves. "Looks like nature's repossessing their property," I said one afternoon. Grandpa smiled. "That's the plan." But the HOA wasn't quite finished. A few days later, another letter arrived. This one marked legal notice. They were threatening to sue for obstruction of association duties and defamation of character. Grandpa read it silently, then handed it to me. "Defamation?" he said. "They parked on my driveway. If that's defamation, I guess the flowers are guilty too." He didn't respond to the letter. Instead, he made more improvements. He added a small wooden bench near the bird bath, a trellis covered in morning glories, and a stone path leading right up to the truck's bumper. He even put up a laminated QR code that linked to a page explaining how to register your own habitat. Visitors loved it. The HOA hated it. That weekend, as we sat on the porch watching a butterfly land on the hood ornament of the buried truck, Grandpa turned to me and said, "Funny thing about rules, they always work both ways. They just never expect you to read them." I nodded. "So, what happens next?" He smirked. "They'll try something new. Maybe send lawyers. Maybe try to tow it. But either way," he gestured at the flowers swaying in the breeze. "Nature's already on our side." He was right. The next battle would come soon, and it would be the biggest one yet. But for now, the garden was thriving. The truck stood silent, slowly surrendering to the green. And Grandpa, with dirt under his nails and that satisfied half-smile, had become the quiet hero of Maplewood Estates. The HOA had built their walls on rules. Grandpa had built his on roots. And roots always win. The quiet didn't last long. 2 weeks after Grandpa's garden had gone viral, the HOA regrouped. They were embarrassed, publicly ridiculed, and desperate to save face. The community was siding with Grandpa. Even residents who had never dared challenge a board were now quoting his line, "If they want control, let's make it beautiful first." So when a thick envelope arrived in our mailbox labeled Notice of Violation and Enforcement Action, we knew the next round had begun. Grandpa read the letter on the porch while sipping coffee, the early light catching his silver hair. The document was written in cold legal jargon, but the message was simple. The HOA demanded access to remove their vehicles immediately. If he didn't comply within 5 days, they'd exercise authority under community bylaws and tow the trucks, with or without his consent. Grandpa folded the paper slowly. 5 days, he said. That's generous. Gives the tomatoes time to ripen. But behind the humor, I could see his mind working. He wasn't about to let anyone destroy what he'd built. By day 3, a tow truck appeared at the end of our driveway. A man in a yellow vest stepped out, clipboard in hand, accompanied by a middle-aged HOA representative. Mr. Collins, the same man who'd ignored Grandpa's calls weeks earlier. Grandpa was already waiting for them. He'd been pruning roses by the fence, wearing his old straw hat and denim shirt. Dirt streaked across his forearms. "Morning, gentlemen," he said, resting his clippers on the fence. "Mr. Carson," Collins began, voice tight, "we're here to remove HOA property. You've had sufficient notice." Grandpa nodded. "You're welcome to try. But just so you know," he pointed to the sign on the fence, "this is a registered wildlife habitat. You move that truck, you destroy protected plants and nesting areas. That's a county violation, not mine." The tow truck driver hesitated. "Is that true?" Grandpa pulled out the certification paperwork, laminated and sealed. "All official. You want to call your supervisor before touching anything." The driver stepped back, visibly uneasy. "Sir, I just move vehicles. I don't mess with environmental stuff." Colin's face turned red. "You're not moving a rainforest. It's a driveway with weeds." Grandpa smiled. "Then you shouldn't mind paying the fine for damaging it." The driver looked between them, clearly uncomfortable. "You know what? I think I'll pass. You two can sort this out." He packed up his cables, climbed into the truck, and drove off, leaving Collins fuming in a cloud of exhaust. Neighbors who'd been watching from across the street cheered quietly. Someone even clapped. Collins pointed a finger at Grandpa. "This isn't over." Grandpa tipped his hat. "I sure hope not. I'm just getting started." The next day, the HOA called a special meeting at the community center. Word spread fast, and half the neighborhood showed up. I went with Grandpa, not because he needed backup, but because I didn't want to miss it. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Evelyn Ricks sat at the head of the table, perfectly composed in her Navy suit. Colin stood beside her, red-faced and sweating. Evelyn opened the meeting with a statement. "This board has worked tirelessly to maintain standards in our community. However, recent actions by one homeowner have undermined our authority and created a false narrative that the HOA is overreaching." From the back, someone called out, "Maybe stop parking on people's property then." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She continued, "Mr. Carson's so-called wildlife garden is a violation of neighborhood aesthetic regulations and presents a safety hazard." Grandpa stood. "You mean the flowers? Or the butterflies? Which one's the hazard, ma'am?" The room chuckled again. Evelyn's composure cracked for a moment, but she pressed on. "We are here to reach an understanding. Mr. Carson, we're offering you the chance to remove the vehicles voluntarily so that we can restore order." Grandpa crossed his arms. "You can take your trucks when you restore respect. You parked on private land, ignored my complaints, and now you're mad that people like my flowers more than your rules." The room erupted in murmurs and applause. Even some board members looked uneasy. Evelyn banged her gavel. "Enough. This meeting is adjourned." She stormed out before anyone else could speak. Afterward, half the neighborhood gathered outside to shake Grandpa's hand. One elderly woman, Mrs. Peterson, said, "You know, Walt, you've given us all some courage. They fined me for wind chimes last year. Maybe I'll plant a garden too." Grandpa grinned. "Make sure it's native plants. They drive the HOA crazy." By now, Grandpa's garden truck had become a symbol of resistance. Local newspapers ran headlines like, "Man turns HOA dispute into flowering sanctuary." A few schools even brought kids by to see it as part of an environmental field trip. The HOA, meanwhile, was drowning in bad publicity. Their email inbox overflowed with complaints from residents demanding leniency, transparency, or at least a little common sense. So they tried a new tactic: intimidation. Late one evening, a letter was slipped under our door. It wasn't from the HOA directly, but from a law firm representing them. It accused Grandpa of defamation of the association's reputation and willful obstruction of authorized maintenance. They demanded he remove all plant matter from the driveway within 72 hours or face legal action. Grandpa read it over dinner. He didn't say a word at first, just kept eating his stew. Then he set the paper down, dabbed his mouth with a napkin, and said, "Well, if they want to play lawyer games, let's make it fun." The next morning, he hung a large banner on the fence that read, "This area is under ECO legal review. Enter at your own risk." Then he called a friend, Linda Chavez, a retired environmental lawyer who lived 3 streets over. She'd been following the story online and agreed to help pro bono. Within days, she filed a formal notice to the county environmental office, stating that unauthorized removal of the certified wildlife habitat may violate local conservation ordinances. It was a brilliant move. Any further HOA action could now trigger an investigation, something no board wanted. Grandpa, however, didn't gloat. He spent his mornings tending the garden and his evenings on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the truck's hood. One night, I asked him, "Why do you keep fighting them? You already won." He looked out at the garden. "It's not about winning. It's about teaching. They wanted control. I wanted peace. Now, maybe they'll think twice before stepping on someone else's land." A week later, a black SUV pulled up. Not an HOA vehicle this time, but a county inspector. He was polite, middle-aged, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carson," he said, "we've received reports about this site. Just need to verify your certification and condition of the habitat." Grandpa showed him everything, the documentation, the plants, even the birdhouses. The man nodded approvingly. "Looks good to me. Beautiful work, actually. You're in full compliance." Before leaving, the inspector leaned in and whispered, "Between you and me, my wife's been following your story online. You're a local hero." When the SUV left, Grandpa laughed until he cried. "Imagine that," he said. "All this over 2 trucks and a few flowers." But the final showdown came unexpectedly. One stormy evening, headlights flashed across the windows. Another tow truck had arrived, unmarked this time, operating after dark. Grandpa and I rushed outside, rain pouring down. 2 men in raincoats were unlatching the gate. "Evening, boys," Grandpa called out. His voice cut through the rain like a whip. "You planning on towing something that doesn't belong to you?" One of the men hesitated. "We were told to retrieve HOA property." "Got paperwork?" Grandpa asked. "They didn't." "Then you'd better leave," he said firmly. "Because right now, you're trespassing, and there's a security camera recording every second." The men exchanged glances, muttered something, and climbed back into the truck. The engine roared, the tires spun, and they disappeared into the storm. Grandpa stood there in the rain, water dripping from his hat, lightning flashing across the sky behind him. "They still don't get it," he said quietly. "You can't tow away respect." When morning came, the rain had washed the garden clean. The flowers gleamed brighter, the air smelled fresh, and the HOA never returned. They had finally learned what the rest of the neighborhood already knew. You can fight a man's opinion, but not his roots. The morning after the local news story aired, things around Maplewood Estates changed fast. Grandpa's HOA garden was all anyone could talk about. Cars slowed down as they passed, neighbors took photos, and some even brought coffee to thank him for standing up to the association. But the HOA? They weren't clapping. By midweek, the board called for an emergency meeting. They posted notices on mailboxes saying unauthorized modifications and obstructed access routes would be addressed immediately. The tone was almost comical after months of their silence. Grandpa just smiled when he read the notice. "Took them long enough to wake up," he said, sitting on the porch swing. "I was beginning to think they'd given up entirely." Then, one Thursday morning, the rumble of engines echoed down the street. 2 tow trucks, escorted by a shiny HOA pickup, rolled up in front of our property. A handful of board members got out, clipboards in hand, sunglasses hiding their expressions. "Mr. Walters," said the president, a tall, slick-haired man named Greg Dawson, "we're here to remove the obstruction." Grandpa set down his coffee. "Obstruction?" he repeated. "You mean your abandoned trucks?" Greg didn't smile. "They're HOA property, and you've illegally fenced them in. You need to allow us access." Grandpa stood, hands in his overall pockets, calm as a pond. "Those trucks have been sitting here for over a month. I called. I filed. You ignored me. Now, they're part of my landscape." Greg's jaw tightened. "You can't just claim HOA property." Grandpa raised an eyebrow. You claim my driveway first. Fair's fair. One of the tow drivers chuckled under his breath, but quickly turned it into a cough when Greg shot him a glare. The HOA members stepped forward, trying to open the gate to the garden. But Grandpa had installed a simple latch with a padlock. When Greg demanded the key, Grandpa just said, "Not until you sign a release saying you trespassed." They argued for 20 minutes. Neighbors began to gather across the street, whispering and filming. Someone called the sheriff's office to mediate. When the deputy arrived, he looked over the scene. 2 trucks fenced into a flower-filled driveway. An angry HOA president and a 72-year-old man holding a watering can like it was a badge of honor. After a few quiet questions, the deputy nodded. "Far as I can tell," he said, "this driveway's private property. The vehicles were parked without permission. Mr. Walters, you're within your rights to decide when or if they're removed." Greg's face flushed red. "You can't be serious." The deputy shrugged. "Maybe next time, don't park your trucks on someone else's land." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Defeated, Greg turned back toward his car. "We'll see you in court," he hissed. Grandpa smiled. "Bring seeds," he said. "We'll plant a victory garden when you lose." The HOA never took it to court. The story had gone too public and too viral. Every clip online showed Grandpa as the calm, reasonable property owner who'd been ignored for weeks before standing up for himself. The HOA's reputation took a nosedive. Within a month, the trucks were quietly removed, not by order, but by shame. They came at night. No tow crews, no officials, just one quiet man and an engine hum in the dark. By sunrise, the space was empty, but the garden stayed. Grandpa kept expanding it, adding rows of sunflowers, birdhouses, and a small stone path that wound through where the trucks had been. The once gravel driveway became something beautiful, a living reminder of what one man's patience and quiet defiance could grow into. Neighbors began to bring their kids to see it. They called it the driveway garden. Even people outside the neighborhood stopped by to take pictures. Mom asked once if he'd ever consider paving it again. Grandpa just shook his head. "Nope," he said. "Every flower here is a reminder that when people push you around, you can push back, gently but strong." One afternoon, I found him sitting in his rocking chair, watching the butterflies drift through the garden. "You think the HOA will ever mess with us again?" I asked. He smiled, slow and sure. "Not unless they like daisies in their engines." We both laughed. Later that summer, Grandpa put up one last wooden sign near the edge of the road. It said, "Once an HOA parking lot, now a garden of freedom." Underneath, he painted a small note. "Respect grows where rules fail." That sign stood long after the trucks were gone. The HOA stopped sending notices. Greg resigned quietly a few months later. And Grandpa? He just kept planting, because for him, the fight wasn't about flowers. It was about respect, about standing his ground without raising his voice. The driveway had started as a place for parking, but it ended as proof that sometimes the best revenge is beauty. So, if you ever find yourself dealing with an HOA that doesn't listen, just remember Grandpa Walt's words. Don't fight them with anger. Fight them with roots. And that's how a stubborn old man turned a driveway dispute into a legend. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe, like, and follow for more wild neighborhood tales. Only on Zarila HOA Stories.